Hello, my name is Arthur Contreras, and I am presenting to you the relationship between disasters and tourism. First, I believe it's important to define a disaster. So, this is a definition from FEMA, and it says that any natural catastrophe, including any hurricane, tornado, storm, high water, wind-driven water, tidal wave, tsunami, earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslide, mudslide, snowstorm, or drought, or regardless of cause, any fire, flood, or explosion in any part of the United States, which, in the determination of the President, causes damage of sufficient severity and magnitude to warrant a major disaster assistance under the Stafford Act to supplement the efforts and available resources of states, local governments, and disaster relief organizations in alleviating the damage, loss, hardship, and suffering thereby. Okay. So I found this something kind of interesting, which is called disaster tourism. And disaster tourism is basically when tourists are drawn to a location after a disaster has occurred, which is kind of different from what most people would think when they consider disasters in tourism. It's also known as dark tourism, and it sometimes has been considered to be dark because it puts tragedy on display, but some people have actually found that it can offer themes of hope and renewal. Disaster tourism gives tourists the chance to see how an affected area is rebuilt when people work together toward a common goal. This type of tourism can lessen what is called disaster fatigue because it reminds tourists that the area will continue to need federal funding, volunteers, and tourist revenue so that they can continue to rebuild. So here's some ideas I found about disaster tourism. Some researchers have argued that in contemporary society, tourists are increasingly visiting sites that commemorate natural or man-made disasters, such as sites of human deaths due to earthquakes, tsunamis, war, political conflicts, and other macabre events. Other researchers argued that the dark in the experience in visiting post-disaster sites is not necessarily related to contemplating death per se, but rather to contemplating one's life in relation to the disaster and one's mortality. One disaster that receives some attention is, in regards to tourism, is in Christchurch, New Zealand. September 2010 and February 2011, Christchurch, New Zealand experienced major earthquakes that were followed by thousands of aftershocks. The second earthquake in February 2011 was registered as a 6.34 on the Richter scale. The earthquake caused major damage and 185 fatalities. Some historical and iconic buildings collapsed, including the Anglican Cathedral. Less than 2 years later, Christchurch was put on Lonely Planet's 2013 list of top 10 cities to visit around the world. Residents of Christchurch felt that the tourism was important for both people from New Zealand and others from abroad. They felt that it is important that the memory of the disaster remains alive for residents who have lived through it. The residents are worried that the dark nature of the event will be diminished or forgotten, and somehow their suffering is also diminished as the buildings are repaired. Here's an image of some tourists posing in front of the Anglican Cathedral in Christchurch, New Zealand. Another instance of a disaster that resulted in more tourism was the L'Aquila earthquake in Italy. The earthquake killed 308 people, injured 1,500, and made 65,000 people homeless. The earthquake in 2009 resulted in the city becoming a major tourism destination. Tourists were attracted to the horror of the destroyed city. Residents of L'Aquila were initially upset at the tourists that were interested in seeing the aftermath of the deadly earthquake, but later on residents changed their opinion and felt that tourism had a positive effect of preventing the plight of L'Aquila from being forgotten. Here's an image of a building that was destroyed in the earthquake. After the Hurricane Katrina, there was some disaster tourism, and it didn't have the same effect as it did in other parts. It was not appreciated, and the tourism was criticized because it was seen as objectifying the suffering of others. As you can see, this is a sign that a resident of New Orleans made in regards to the tourists. In New Orleans, you could pay to take a tour on a bus that would take you around the city to major areas of destruction. And the residents of New Orleans felt as if they were some sort of freak show. Here's a picture of some people taking a selfie and a photo at Ground Zero at the 9/11 memorial. Some felt that the memorial didn't really have the effect it should have, and that it's a place crowded with tourists smiling for Facebook pictures is not what New York and 9/11 deserved. Puerto Rico was damaged after Hurricane Maria, which was a Category 4 storm in September of 2017. The storm damaged much of this country's infrastructure. The article. This article was published in 2018 and stated that 68% of the residents still were without power. Puerto Rico is a popular vacation destination during the winter months, but has seen significantly less tourism. And by February of 2018, Puerto Rico's hotels and restaurants were 80% of Puerto Rico's hotels and restaurants were back in service. Here's an image of devastation in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Here's an image that I thought was interesting. It's disaster tourism in Chernobyl. These are some tourists posing in front of a Ferris wheel. And I thought it was interesting that most people would probably associate disasters with a decline in tourism, but there are some instances that disasters actually encourage tourism. Puerto Rico is a tourist destination for its beautiful beaches, so it does make sense that a major disaster that wiped out much of the infrastructure harmed the tourist economy. Thank you.